Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary Sangiovanni!
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. I'm Mary Sangiovanni, up to shenanigans once again of cosmic proportions, and today I have a special guest with me to discuss the book that we're going to talk about, Brian Keene.
Woohoo! Did I do that right?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Wait. Now, I have not been on your podcast since you started it, even though we live together.
This is true.
There's something I've been dying to do.
Okay.
I rarely get to do my impression of both Tim Levin and Rio Yours at the same time.
Do it.
Do your listeners know that is Tim Levin and Rio Yours at the beginning of your show every week?
I think it was mentioned in the very first episode, but I'm not really sure.
What is it Tim says? It's time for Cosmic Shenanigans. Or Shenanigans Ensue.
That's right.
With Mary Sangiovanni!
Woohoo!
There you go. No, look, you're losing listeners already. This is supposed to be an academic show.
Oh, we're going to have fun, folks.
You'll never get the respect of St. Yoshi now.
Oh, like it was coming in droves before that. Okay, well, first, before I start, I'd like to mention that my newest cosmic horror novel and the second installment in the Kathy Ryan series, called Behind the Door, is now available in both ebook and paperback through Kensington's Lyrical Press. You can pick up a copy through Amazon or anywhere else books are sold. And in case you're curious, since I realized the last time I mentioned this, I never said what the book was about. Here's the write-up on Amazon. Occult specialist Kathy Ryan returns in this thrilling novel of paranormal horror from Mary Sangiovanni, the author of Chills. Some doors should never be opened. In the rural town of Zarephath, deep in the woods on the border of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, stands the door. No one knows where it came from, and no one knows where it leads. For generations, folks have come to the door seeking solace or forgiveness. They deliver a handwritten letter asking for some emotional burden to be lifted, sealed with a mixture of wax and their own blood, and slide it beneath the door. 3 days later, their wish is answered, for better or worse. And Carrie is a single mother grieving over the suicide of her teenage daughter. She made a terrible mistake asking the powers beyond the door to erase the painful memories of her lost child. And when she opened the door to retrieve her letter, she unleashed every sin, secret, and spirit ever trapped on the other side. Now it falls to occultist Kathy Ryan to seal the door before Zarephath becomes hell on earth. So that's Behind the Door. I hope you'll consider picking up a copy. Now we'll go right into what our show is about. This is going to be a special Cosmic Shenanigans, a two-parter, if you will, because we are talking about a work that to me is both intimidating and quintessential, a story which, in my opinion, was Lovecraftian fiction before Lovecraft, who claimed it was one of his greatest influences. I am, of course, referring to The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson. This short novel was first published in Britain by Chapman and Hall Limited, London, in 1908, but its most popular version was by Arkham House Press, Sauk City, Wisconsin, in 1946 as part of the House on the Borderland and Other Novels.
Yeah, there's an Arkham House edition right over there on the
which
shelf.
Brian Keene has a copy of. Now, I've asked Brian to be on the show because this is one of Brian's favorite stories.
Oh, absolutely. One of my all-time favorites, one I reread every year, at least once a year. Have not gotten around to rereading it this year, but I probably will in December.
What I think is fascinating about this story, and having read it, or I should say reread it for the show this week, is how much he packs into which is essentially a fairly short novel by novel standards.
Yeah, I mean, today it would be considered a long novella.
Right. Right.
You know, at the time, this was the ideal length. But I mean, you consider when it was published, 1908. You know, it was 1908, and it's one of the first works that moved the genre from the Gothic supernatural trappings of the late 19th century into new directions, directions many of which are still prevalent in the field today. I argue that House on the Borderland is, in fact, the first modern horror novel.
I would tend to agree with you, and I do want to address that, the idea that it has taken it in a number of directions which are prevalent today, because that ends up in my notes where we talk about things that they do, things that he does in this story, which almost seems to have leapt over what Lovecraft does and are being done in cosmic horror and in just straight up regular horror fiction today.
Oh, absolutely. I don't want to jump ahead of us here, but there's all kinds of tropes. Can I summarize the general plot of the novel?
Sure, yeah.
That alone, you've got this unnamed reclusive narrator. Mm-hmm. Gee, where have we seen that before? He discovers that the remote rural country house he lives in with his sister and dog straddles the border between our world and another dimension. That other world is populated by a giant demonic swine creature. He confronts the beast during an involuntary bout of astral projection, and then finds his home here in our world is under siege by similar, if smaller, swine things. We then get what turns into a siege novel.
Yes.
Gee, where have we seen that in the genre before? To hold off the horde, but then he takes another involuntary out-of-body trip, this time through time and space itself, where he witnesses the extinction of the sun and the end of the world. When he returns, he has to face the giant creature he first encountered in that other dimension, now loosed upon our world. He also has to cope with a strange fungal infection that's spreading throughout the house. Everything I just said there. It all sounds so disjointed. It's like, what the fuck? Can we curse on your podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. What the fuck? It's like he threw all these random plot elements in there. Well, it sounds like it, but there's actually cohesion in the book. But everything there I just mentioned, the narrator, the setting,
the different strains of plot.
Yeah.
Which they do, like Brian said, they do tie together, despite how disparate they may seem. They do tie together. But all of them, you could basically, having read that summary, it's pretty much all of Lovecraft's canon.
Yeah,
every plot he's ever come up with.
Monsters besieging a house, sinister fungus, astral projection, other dimensions, hellish dimensions. Not just Lovecraft. Think about all the horror and dark fantasy stories and novels and comics and films you've watched, particularly in cosmic horror.
Exactly, yeah.
This is the root right here, folks.
It is.
And this predates Lovecraft.
It does. It predates Lovecraft. In fact, Lovecraft never read any Hodgson until the 1930s.
Right.
But it's fascinating how much of this has impacted supernatural horror fiction in general going forward.
Generations. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard. There's correspondence from Howard about reading Hodgson. Manly Wade Wellman. Yeah. A big fan. Carl Edward Wagner.
Yes. And you can see it, and when you read, this and then their work, you can see the influence.
And our generation, Tim Levin, I know is
actually in the Wikipedia entry about Hodgson, you and Tim Levin are both listed as modern horror writers influenced by Hodgson.
Do they mention Simon Clark and China Miéville?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I would say the four of us most definitely.
Yeah, I would say maybe about 6 or 8 of you, but you guys, you're all mentioned in there as being influenced by Hodgson.
I have that going for me.
You do.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay, so anyway, very much an epistolary structure. I never say that word right, but it means letter. It means like letter written. Epistolary, thank you.
I don't know if that's right or not.
I think you're right.
You're the one with the college degree. You got the master's degree. I barely graduated high school.
This is why you're
here. Why am I
Keene.
even on this show?
This is why you're here. Very much an epistolary structure, which means basically that it's letters and manuscripts that we learn things from. This novel is a story within a story within a story. Okay? And I think that for a lot of people who attempt to read House on the Borderland, there's this particular structure, as well as the fact that the plot does seem to deviate on the surface into different directions, which don't immediately seem connected, but really are. This is why I think that it comes across as being very dense and being very difficult to to comprehend. But we're going to take this in two parts. As I mentioned, this is a two-part show. This first part, we're going to take the first, I guess, maybe the first half, the first 2/3 of the book. And then next week, we're going to talk about the other section where we really unpack this and, without getting too bogged down into details, cover the essential points of this. Now, in my opinion, the structure of this, the fact that it is a story within a story within a story, it lends the whole tale a certain cosmic surrealism. It's the nature of that surrealism, or maybe more specifically, the terrifying possibility that it is not just third-hand hallucination that makes it cosmic horror. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so first, let's talk a little bit about Hodgson himself, okay? He had a very interesting life, and many of its pivotal points influenced his writing, such as the infant deaths of several of his siblings, the fact that his father, who was an Anglican priest, moved his family around from parish to parish throughout England and Ireland, and, of course, his early life at sea. Because he was a short, sensitive, and almost pretty guy, by all accounts, he was subject to bullying, which subsequently led to personal training and bodybuilding.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He was a badass.
He was, and he was a badass because he didn't start out that way. And so it's sort of like, yay, the underdog, you know?
He knew judo. As you said, he was a bodybuilder, and that muscularity, I think it was China Mieville said, that muscularity bleeds into his work. Not so much in House on the Borderland, but the
Sargasso Sea and
Sargasso
any
Sea
sea-related story.
Boats the Glen Carrig in particular, which isn't really cosmic horror, but boy, folks, if you want to read just another fantastic one, Boats of the Glen Carrig.
Yeah. I kind of wish I could cover that on the show. Yeah. If
I
can find a way.
Like The Nightland, which I'm sure you'll get around to covering at some point because it's cosmic horror. Not my favorite novel by any means. I've never made it through The Nightland.
Right.
But I've made it far enough that the character in there, he describes himself as an athlete. So yeah, you're right. It bled into his work.
Yes. I think a lot of this did. The settings, clearly, especially the Irish settings, come from the places where he's lived, and the idea of getting revenge. A lot of his sea stories involve getting revenge. A new sailor getting revenge on the person who bullied him on the ship. And of course, in the long-standing tradition of occult detectives, his famous Thomas Carnacki was admittedly partially inspired by Algernon Blackwood's John Silence. So he was he was a writer's writer, and by that I mean that he really took in the light, like his experiences, his life around him. People always say, "Where do you get your ideas?" Where you get them is from the life you're living. So go out and live life so that you have something to write about. You get your ideas from the people you read and the people that you talk to. He was one of those. Well, another place where he got a lot of his experience, a lot of things for him to write about, were his experiences as a soldier in World War I. That influenced his work as well. Unfortunately, it was the war that finally ended such a fascinating and varied life, as he was killed by direct impact of an artillery shell at the Fourth Battle of Ypres, I hope I'm saying that right, in mid-April of 1918.
Yuggoth. Fourth Battle of Yuggoth.
He was the Battle of Yuggoth, the Fourth Battle of Yuggoth.
As you were talking, now I didn't want to pull the Arkham House edition off the shelf because then I got to take it out of its bag and it's a big old pain in the ass. So I got the British Fantasy Masterworks omnibus, Hodgson omnibus, which is fantastic. And yet China Mieville wrote the introduction to that book, and I was flipping through it while you were talking. He says here, you were talking about Hodgson's physicality, his robustness. Right. China points out here, though his characters might sound suited to a robust Rider Haggard yarn, Hodgson has nothing in common with that anti-cosmic horror tradition. His books are bloated with visions, with a sense of vastness, of apocalyptic wonder, of the alien horror of an unsympathetic universe. It's a remarkable feat. Hodgson never lets even his most unlikely characters get in the way of a brisk blast of existential fear.
Right, because if you think about a lot of the robust character types, the Haggard types, the even the Howard types, where so much of the story is internal. It is man's own physicality against nature, man's own physicality against other physicalities. This Hodgson's work still exists in, like you said, in this sphere of that physicality, that powerfulness, still being dwarfed by this vast universe and vast other universes around him. So it is definitely cosmic horror, in his soul that he's writing about here. And it starts out, which I think is sort of interesting. It starts out with a poem. Okay. It is
a lot of his stuff.
A lot of his stuff was predicated with a poem, right? And this is a cosmic horror poem. I'll read the quote from the beginning. It says, "From the manuscript discovered in 1877 by Messrs. Tonneson and Berignog in the ruins that lie to the south of the village of Creighton in the west of Ireland." Okay, and again, what follows that is a cosmic horror poem called Shoon of the Dead. And right away I thought of Shaun of the Dead, and I'm wondering if Shaun of the Dead, the title was a spoof on this, of Shoon of the Dead, which precedes the author's introduction to the book. I think it sets the tone for the rest of the story. And again, although I have not read all of Hodgson's entire catalog of lengthier works, as Brian said, he often begins them with a poem.
Oh, yeah. Jane Frank, in her Introduction to the Lost Poetry of William Hope Hodgson, of which I just pulled the Tartarus Press edition off the shelf. I'm delighted to be on your show because your listeners will actually know what the hell I'm talking about with this. If I did this on my podcast, that's not a Richard Lehman novel. The Tartarus Press edition.
I think it's wonderful that you can do that. You can pull these things off the shelf.
Jane Frank says poetry was a significant creative outlet for Hodgson throughout his adult life. You're right. Almost all of his novels and several of his short stories begin with an original poem.
Right. And I think that's something that's sort of overlooked because I don't think that people often take into account a lot of horror writers' poetry unless they are known as poets. And so I think it's if you read this Shoon of the Dead, which he writes is for his father, the character, I believe, but not Hodgson himself. It is clearly it encapsulates cosmic horror dread in a way that I've never seen a poem do before. So it's definitely, I don't want to ruin it. It's definitely something worth reading, especially if you're reading this whole story. And I think it's a nice way to start it off. As I say, I think it sets the tone for the rest of the tale that follows. And the trick with horror, and with cosmic horror or supernatural monster fiction in general, in my opinion, is grounding or tethering it wherever possible to reality. The necessary suspension of disbelief is already at a higher level than real-world horror because, and real world I put in quotes, real-world horror, stuff with serial killers, murderers, natural disasters, things like that. Because monsters and the supernatural are not generally a part of reality as experienced by the average white, Christian, or atheist or agnostic reading demographic. Okay? Monsters and the supernatural are not usually a part of everyday life. Therefore, many times the monsters are symbols for innate or subconscious fears. With cosmic horror, whose supernatural aspect is on so much a grander scale, and on which so much of the story is predicated, and which challenges the thought processes of even those inclined to believe in magic or the supernatural, whether through religion or spiritualism, maintaining that fabric of suspended disbelief is all the more important. And this is done in a number of ways. One of the most common, as we have discussed, is the epistolary or the manuscript/letter format. It allows readers to find horror in the pitiable circumstances of perhaps either a mind gone insane, or to find horror in the revelation of that which is otherwise kept so closely secret. Now, one of the things I want to talk about, Brian, in bringing this up, is that he writes his own introduction to this story, and he pens it as himself, and he claims that the story following was handed to him and that he is simply presenting it to the reader, that he's basically transcribing it from the pit-smelling, soft, cloggy pages he was handed. It's an interesting literary technique that reaches for the same sense of maybe once-removed realism as found footage movies, that the story is real because it was found, not made up, and thus claims of what happened and what might still happen can be linked beyond the veil of fiction to the real world. Would you agree that that's a literary device then that in a way is trying to ground this cosmic horror in a sense of which was, to the best of my knowledge, not done during his time?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely I would. The poetry, I think he included a lot just because he needed an outlet for it.
Right.
But yeah, that introduction, it's not the first time he's done something like that either. And yeah, I think that's absolutely why he did it.
Yeah. I like that. I like that there's that sort of what has struck me as really is that Hodgson is the kind of writer then who likes to try new things. He likes to tackle new avenues, new ways of telling scary stories, new ways of exploring the greater, universe of the mind. And I like that. Now, if we get into more specifically the story, okay, the village of Creighton, in which Tonneson and I'm assuming that the narrator is Berignog, because they're mentioned both in the beginning, and Tonneson is a character in the story early on. Now, the village of Creighton is a small village where these two characters are vacationing, ostensibly to go angler fishing. Now, it's not on any map, nor is the nearby river. In my opinion, this upholds the horror and especially cosmic horror tradition of places real but forgotten, the last vestiges of an old world and its old world magic, where supernatural things can and do still happen. This is one of those things, as Brian mentioned, this is one of those avenues that Lovecraft did pick up on, but very much exists in modern cosmic horror. You see it in the movie In the Mouth of Madness. You see it in a lot of even non-cosmic horror. This idea that, I found this place, but I probably can never find it again because it's not on any map. Nobody knows what I'm talking about, but damn it, I was there. Okay? The villagers, too, are admirable models of those rural, poverty-stricken folk from out-of-the-way places who still give funny looks to outsiders and keep to themselves, and they keep the knowledge of the strange and unusual as secret as they are able. Okay? For the people of Creighton, this is made much easier by the fact that they speak Irish. They don't speak English. And the narrator speaks English and no Irish. Okay? The only real varying aspect here is that after a gift of fish, they prove much friendlier than most cosmic horror small-town villages. We don't have Innsmouth grumpy people here.
Well, Innsmouth people would be particularly upset if you gave them a gift of fish.
This is true. But would you agree?
That's my cousin Fred you're trying to feed me.
Horror. Would you say that that's one of those things that we were talking about? One of those aspects of modern horror that he sort of ventures in and tries something,
absolutely, yeah,
something new. And I remember
this is where it all stems from.
This is
as I'm concerned.
And this is one of those things that makes this worth, pursuing a careful read of, despite whether the language is difficult or whatever. Is all of these little gems like this, right? All of these little moments where you could say, okay, yes, I've seen that before, but I've only seen it before because it happened here first. It's really, there's a lot of subtlety in Hodgson's work that I didn't get the first time I read it,
right?
But I get it now, and this is one of those little things. The place now, again, I'm trying to cover the salient points of the story, so I'm going to skip over some of the smaller parts of the plot here. But the place where Tonneson and Berignog find the waterfall, it impresses upon them a certain sensation of creepiness, naturally. Much like in The Willows, which we've discussed in prior episodes, the locations exude a kind of raw, natural power. The sheer drop of the waterfall into the chasm below is dizzying. The ruins, though, that's the real prize of their exploration. These ruins that they find essentially suspended on an outcropping of rock over this enormous drop into nothingness. When they are in these ruins and looking out over everything, they're so high above the chasm floor that that strikes them as being sort of intimidating. And the reason I make the comparison to the Willows is that there is even here in this story a sense of nature or the supernatural extensions of nature as being part of the initial building of the atmosphere, the initial feeling of unease or creepiness comes from the fact that even the nature around them is somehow more powerful and in possession of secrets about the universe that the people, the human beings who are supposed masters of the planet just don't know. Now, there's another thing, and again, we talked about the subtlety of his writing here. It's not as obvious in this story as it is in other stories, but this chasing after of knowledge, this chasing after of secrets, really starts here in the ruins where Tonneson starts excavating. Essentially, they're picking through the debris of these ruins, and they find a manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, that what propels them to leave is that the surrounding woods, they hear a wail.
Right.
This sort of low wail, which unnerves them, and again, it goes back to nature being sort of intimidating. Nature doesn't want them there. They've intruded on a place that they shouldn't be, and instead of leaving right away, they went in pursuit of knowledge. What are these ruins? Why are they here? Now, this manuscript is titled "The House on the Borderland." Right?
Dun dun dun.
Dun da da da. And this is where, in my opinion, I think there are two different parts of the story where you could say the cosmic horror of the horror begins. You could say that it's either this point right here, which is my argument, or you could say it happens later on in the part that we're going to cover in part two of the show.
I think it starts here.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think it's because now what we get again, and again, bear with me, folks. So we start off with Hodgson saying he found a manuscript, right? The manuscript is Tonneson and Berrignog's account, right?
And if you thought Tonneson and Berrignog were the main characters, your protagonists,
exactly,
you were wrong.
Right, which is also something that has very rarely, because not always people do it well, but has actually continued on to modern horror traditions. You have it in Psycho, where, spoiler alert, you think Janet Leigh is going to be the main character, and she's not. You have it in Scream, where right off the bat they show you actresses that you have seen before, that you know. So you assume that because these are famous actresses, they are going to be the ones who are the main characters of the movie, and they're killed off in the first 10 minutes of the movie. So this is another case of that, where you think these two characters, I mean, not exactly, but where you think Tonneson and Berrignog are going to be the narrators of the story, and they're not. The narrator of the story is the new narrator, the narrator of The House on the Borderland, the one writing the manuscript that Tonneson and Berrignog find.
The unnamed man's man.
Exactly. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, right? We never get this man's name.
Never get his name.
In the story. We get the name of his dog, Pepper,
right. Mm-hmm.
and we get the name of his sister, which is Mary.
Right.
But we never get this narrator's name.
Correct.
So, but from this point on...
And again, not the only time in Hodgson's work that occurs.
And do you think that that's because he wants this to be relatable to sort of an everyman kind of thing? Do you think there's a reason for that?
That's a great question. If I had known I was going to be on, and I had known that in advance,
I sort of sprung this on him.
for that. I don't know. Part of it is, as a writer, as a Hodgson enthusiast, part of me suspects a lot of these characters were Mary Sue's for him.
Okay. Okay.
Meaning that he was injecting himself,
right?
And maybe subconsciously he never saw a reason to name them because he saw them as himself, or or maybe it's what you said. I don't know.
That's interesting, though.
I'm your
I can see
second
that.
guest. Your first guest, of course, was Paul Tremblay. He would know, but I am no Paul Tremblay.
I think it could probably be both. I think if he is injecting himself into these stories, which, just based on our discussions here, it sounds like that's pretty likely, that might have been all the more reason not to name this main character, because...
Let's give him a name.
Okay.
For the first time ever. This was published in 1908. Dave. Let's call him Dave.
Let's call him Dave.
Okay.
Okay. Now, our new narrator, Dave, as we have thus christened him, he admits that his old house... We get a couple of things which I find interesting. One of them is sort of this Poe-like tradition of saying, yeah, I know everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not. They all just suck. And that's, of course, paraphrased, because that's not exact. He put it in much more eloquent terms, but our new narrator, Dave, admits that people think he's nuts. He admits that his old house, which is ostensibly the ruins, which are found by Tonneson and Berignog, had a bad reputation. Although at first he doesn't get into what that bad reputation is or why. Just that the house had been untenanted for the last 80 years prior to his buying it. He also admits, as I said, that the peasants who live in the nearby area think he is crazy, and we have the potential element of insanity, either prior to the weird events he records, which would indicate that the events that he is recording are hallucinations of insanity, or as a result of them, both of which happen in cosmic horror stories quite frequently. Now, what are these events? Well, he basically says that he got this diary in order to catalog a series of unusual events that have been happening to him, because he doesn't really have anyone to talk to. He doesn't come across really as a terribly likable guy. But you do feel a certain degree of empathy for him. It could be because of his somewhat misguided but well-meaning attempts to take care of his sister, because of the clear affinity and love he has for his dog. He doesn't come across as a sympathetic kind of guy. But whether or not he's sane, that remains to be seen. What he catalogs in this diary is a trip through vast and faraway space, past stars and galaxies, and even beyond, to a part of space so distant in either time or location. And I want to come back to time and talk with Brian about that too, because I think this is one of the first stories prior to Lovecraft, one of the first cosmic horror stories that really uses time as a means of really formulating the cosmic horror, the cosmic aspect of the cosmic horror.
It is. I mean, there are elements of it before this.
In his own work?
I would have to go back and look at his short fiction and see what predates House, but I'm
Right.
just talking in general. I mean, there's aspects going all the way back to Sumerian traditions involving
Manipulation of time.
manipulation of time, transporting oneself. But in this sort of sequence, in the way it's used in the story, without spoiling it further ahead,
Right.
this is the first instance I can think of where it happens.
Would you say this is maybe one of the first instances in cosmic horror type horror?
Do you consider H.G. Wells' Time Machine cosmic horror, or is that straight science? That's
I
straight
think that is
sci-fi,
science
right?
fiction.
Then
yeah.
yes, for cosmic horror, this is the first.
Okay, that's I could see, because I think it is an important aspect of how he builds the cosmic horror aspect of horror in this story. What we're given in this first astral projection trip that he takes, and it's funny that you said that, because although I've read this 2 or 3 times now, it never occurred to me that astral projection was what he was doing. I don't know why.
Oh yeah,
But
because
it never
he
occurred to me.
stays seated in his
He
study
stays
the whole
seated.
time.
Right.
He does a Doctor Strange.
Yeah. And I'd never thought of it that way, but that's exactly what he does. That's exactly what he does.
The academics and the elite that listen to your show, they're gnashing their teeth. Oh, he's cursing. Bring up Doctor Strange.
No, but it's absolutely a valid point, I think. And where he goes this first time, this first trip, okay, is beyond stars. It's beyond galaxies. Now, already what that does is it establishes a scope of gigantic, almost incomprehensible proportions, which is, again, a clear factor of cosmic horror stories. But also, and this occurred to me, I think, only the second time that I read it, that the fact that he goes past stars to a part of space that looks essentially like endless blackness and descends onto a red-clouded planet with tall mountains that is beyond that part of time and space. It makes me wonder if he's also not moving through time as well, to a point where there were no stars close to this planet. Now, it could be taken either way. I don't think they ever specify in the story.
Well, it depends on whether you think the second half of the book is impacted by this sequence.
That's a good point.
Because in the second half of the book, he does, in fact, move through time.
Right. And I think
but he stays in place that time.
Right. Which is also, I think, and when we get to part 2, we're going to discuss that the manipulation of time, the way it is done, as Brian said, in this story is different than mostly, more or less, any story I've seen.
My reading has always been the sequence that you're talking about right now.
Right.
He moves through space.
But not time.
The second half of the book, he moves through time, but not space.
Okay, so in this segment, then, we could say that he moves through space but not time.
Exactly.
And then it flips. I like that. I like that interpretation. Now, a good portion of modern cosmic horror, as I've said, the other world doesn't always come to the other world will come to the characters, right? The other world comes through dimensional portals, right? It comes through, and we get a sense of alternate dimensions. More or less, all of my catalog of stuff that I've ever written, that's the case. If there's a monster, it's because it's come from some other dimension, some other planet, some other world, right? In this story, and perhaps this is what inspired the triumvirate, okay? In this story, the characters go to the other dimension, the other world, the other place. And I love this, okay? I love this. I think it's a nice switch off, which can still effectively, if not more effectively, convey the scope of size and time and place, that cosmic largeness to the reader. But what makes the juxtaposition of locations so interesting are the parallels between them, which I did not do in the triumvirate, and which I only noticed in this second read around. But which I'm sure Brian can agree with me are part of the things that make this so creepy is the fact that there are a lot of parallels between this other place and his place. The house on the cliff and the other world house in the arena. They're the same house.
Right.
He says, the narrator, Dave, as we have christened him, says it's the same house.
Right.
It's the same house as his own.
The house is a focal point in space and time.
The house is a focal point, exactly. The chasms, although the location of the house in the chasm is different in this other world. The fact that both of these places have an almost endless chasm. That the inhabitants of this strange world reflect in form the deities of ancient Indian and Egyptian mythology. A lot of these people who are watching in this arena are essentially ancient elder gods, right? And they are ancient elder gods that we recognize from the mythology of our own world. And then, of course, as Brian mentioned, there is a ginormous pig monster, pig beast person creature.
Pigman.
The Pigman, who shows up in our world later. But
who Tim Levin and I, very early in our careers,
exactly
blatantly swiped it for a short story we wrote together called Fodder.
Which is a phenomenal story, by the way.
Sadly, I think that's out of print, actually. I should talk to Tim. We should put it on Kindle or something.
It's the only place I've ever seen it, honestly, is in the year's best fantasy. It was year's best fantasy and horror,
we
right?
got in one of the year's best books.
Yeah, that's where I read it, which I think you can still get. but I'm not sure. I think you can still get that book if you should. I mean, it is a phenomenal story, an evident nod to Hodgson, but a very well done.
Our main character is even named William. And it takes place in World War I.
Exactly. And it does make use of, which I find interesting, and I meant to ask you, of all the Hodgson elements, you pick that one. You pick the pig man thing. Why? What is scary to you about these creatures?
Why did we pick that? Tim and I were drinking, as most of these stories begin. No, we
if
were.
I had a nickel for every time a story of Brian started with so and so and I were drinking.
We were. It was the first time that we'd met in person. It was Tim's very first time in the States. It was a World Horror in Denver, Colorado, in I believe year 2000. Mm-hmm. And we're drinking beers and learning about each other, and find out that we're both big fans of William Hope Hodgson, and decided we wanted to do our homage to him right then and there at the bar. And Tim wanted the otherworldly cosmic horror aspects, because that's Tim's wheelhouse.
Right.
And I wanted the pulpy pig monsters because that's my wheelhouse.
So you did a little bit of both.
So we mashed those things together, much like Hodgson does here in the novel.
Right. Which is, I think, maybe why it works so well.
But
because it is a mashup.
I've always thought pig things are scary. Even as a teenager, the fucking pig men in the Star Wars movies. Those things creep me out.
And orcs, which are
orcs,
essentially, I mean, is it the brutish animalistic?
No, I think it's growing up on a farm. We had cows, we had chickens, we had sheep, we had goats. The only animal I minded was a pig, because pigs are mean animals. People talk about, if you die, your cat will wait 7 days to eat you. Your dog won't eat. Pig will eat you while you're still alive.
Yeah,
You never turn your back on a pig. They're mean, and to make them intelligent and bipedal and give them opposable thumbs, that's
them savage on top of it.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, I could see that. I think there is a certain connotation with pigs that really, I think it's the basest, most animalistic, most revolting aspect of our animal nature, which I think is why, to me, that kind of an insult that is connected to pigs, I have always found to be far more insulting than anything else. And I think that's why that there is a certain savageness that maybe that's why it took that form. They're no offense. Piglets are cute, but pigs are kind of ugly, and they smell, and they're mean, and like Brian said, there's a certain savageness, I think, inherent in pigs in general that is so much worse when they are big deity sizes in this particular story. And to quote the story, was there then, after all, something in the old heathen worship, something more than the mere deifying of men, animals, and elements? The thought gripped me. Was there? And I think that's one of the basic principles of cosmic horror, is that this idea that there is something in the old heathen worship. This very line to me connects cosmic horror that uses nature and the power of the elements. Okay, it connects the cosmic horror that uses animals, these pig-like creatures, or any other kind of creature that is mostly a base and savage force, and also of sentient and intelligent creatures that are far more powerful than us. This idea here that the very cosmic horror moment where people realize, this is so much more than what I thought it was, and I can never unknow this. This idea that whatever gods and monsters we've created, they're nothing like the gods and monsters that have existed before, that we've basically relegated to mythology. Now later, Again, here's a quote. Now, as I scrutinized them with greater intentness, my mind began to reach out to fresh conclusions. There was something about them, an indescribable sort of silent vitality that suggested to my broadening consciousness a state of life in death, something that was by no means life as we understand it, but rather an inhuman form of existence that well might be likened to a deathless trance, a condition in which it was possible to imagine their continuing eternally. That, I think, scares people too. And that is also a fundamental principle of cosmic horror, this idea that these things go on. We see that with Cthulhu and Lovecraft stuff, where he is dead but dreaming, I believe is how they put it, that he's not really dead, he's just sort of sleeping dead. And that this is true of a lot of elder gods, that they go into a kind of stasis, I guess, that even death can't stop them. There is in cosmic horror, often in good cosmic horror, as we've suggested with The Endless and other stories like that, sometimes death is not the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes there are things worse than death. Sometimes there are things that transcend death, which can be terrifying.
Sometimes you eat the pig, and sometimes the pig eats you.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the brutish pig people. They're referred to in both the other world and in this one as the things. After coming upon one in the otherworld arena, and then later in the woods, and again when they attack his house, the narrator finds himself more increasingly alone. Now, this is where the story, in my opinion, this is where readers can begin to diverge when it comes to interpretation. Is he crazy, or is this really happening? Pepper, his dog, is injured by one of the things, and he shoots one of the things and kills it. Okay? After an encounter when they attack the house, the narrator's sister Mary supposedly becomes a little unhinged, and having dealt with this is how the narrator sees it, that this stress of this attack has been so traumatizing that she goes a little cuckoo. Now, there's a suggestion, though, on the other end of things, given that Mary didn't seem to have any interaction with or to witness the things. If you go back and reread it, and I did, I went back and reread those sections again just to see if I missed it. Mary doesn't ever seem to see those things at this point in the story. Okay, what she does is try to open the back door, and her brother yells at her. Not only does he yell at her like, "Do you not see the danger? Are you not getting this?" But he basically picks her up and drags her kicking and screaming into her room and locks the door to protect her. Every time he goes to see her, she seems afraid of his presence. And he thinks it's because she's just completely lost it. Here he is trying to protect her, and she's sort of transferring her hostility and her fear to him. Then, once she does seem to collect her senses, and we're going to come back to that in a second, he does unlock the door. He does let her go make breakfast. But she is very careful to avoid any mention of anything that's happened in the few days prior. And in order to not upset her nerves, he doesn't mention it either. Okay? A lot of times when women are imprisoned, okay, they're kind of taught that to an extent what you should do is give in to the person imprisoning you to gain their trust so that they will let you go. Now, the fact that she very calmly says, "No, I think I'm better now. I'd like to make us breakfast." And these are the kinds of things a woman does who knows that if she upsets a man, he's going to lock her up and she will be trapped. To convince him that she is somehow okay, she has free reign of the house now. So is it really how he sees things? Is he imagining these things, or is she really scared of him and not the monsters that he says are out there? Which one of them, then, is perceiving these events unreliably? You know what I mean? What do you think, Brian Keene?
I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil it.
Okay, but do you have a theory?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I think it's revealed in the second half of the book.
Sorry, that was me bumping my microphone.
That was
with
Mary
my
hitting her
teacup.
microphone with tea.
Because I was so excited about this particular aspect of the story. So anyway, but yes, I think that this is a nice little setup where we see insanity injected into this story, as it is in Cosmic Horror, because that's one of the things that monsters almost universally represent in Cosmic Horror. It's the loss of control because you can't trust your own mind or your own body anymore.
Right. And we see that even today, not even just in Cosmic Horror.
Not even just in Cosmic Horror.
Very recent example, Hereditary. Now,
yes.
Granted, that's a supernatural horror movie.
Right.
But it's the same exact setup as here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, where you're not sure where the madness is coming from.
Right.
You know it's there, but you're not sure really which of the characters is the one that's crazy. Now, we have monsters, we have madness, we have otherworldly gods. Now we come to subterranean pits, because what Cosmic Horror story would be complete without subterranean pits? Much like The House and the Statement of Randolph Carter, a novella-ish length work of Lovecraft's, our house here, Dave's house, has a trapdoor leading further down into the earth. From it, the narrator hears laughter as if other beings live below. Eventually, he does explore that subterranean area, and the narrator finds an endless hole in the ground. So, after that, we have shifting and changing of land overnight, right? And this is another thing I want to touch on with Brian, because I want to make sure I didn't read this incorrectly, okay? That there's a shifting and changing of land overnight, that there are floods that basically reshape this whole area, that there's a sudden formation of a lake from the ravine called the Pit, and that there are suggestions that, based on this, I think, there's some suggestion that if the house and ground are bad, that evil pervades the earth itself, deep into the earth, and that it moves on its own time and its own space.
That's right. Because not only are these swine things, these are now subterranean swine things.
Exactly.
From the deepest subterranean pits, you know?
Exactly. And I think there is this sort of fear, which, you know, I mean, it even pervades science fiction and horror and, I guess, fantasy today, that there are the deepest places of our oceans, the deepest places of our earth, of the ground itself, that we have not yet explored. You know, that there's a whole other side of the moon that could have, you know, Nazi bases on it and things like that. That there's this idea that these faraway places within our own realms of security, within our own planet, which we feel at this point in a lot of ways that we should have mastery over, that there are still parts of it that we don't know, that we don't understand, that may very well contain big feet, Bigfoots. See, Brian's over there laughing.
I'm laughing because no offense to your listeners,
right?
Many of whom I'm sure admire the noted works of S.T. Yoshi, who has contributed a lot to Cosmic Horror. But the man is not a fan of mine. He's made it very clear.
No, he's not.
I'm imagining the 5,000-word screed he's going to have on his blog next week, and it's going to be all about how incensed and enraged he is. That first of all, we named the character Dave, and that we tied it to Nazi bases on the moon. And big feet.
And big feet. But, you know, you're right. That does kind of delight me. But the idea is that basically that there are these places that we don't know. And especially in 1908, there were a whole species of animals yet to be discovered. There were jungles and, you know, a lot of adventure fiction is about the jungles and the, you know, Arctic places and all of these faraway locations that most people would never see in their lifetime, that brave explorers would see and bring back, you know, these stories of wild people and even wilder things that these people would do. And I think that's what we get with subterranean pits. There is, I think, a subterranean pit in at least half of Lovecraft stuff. Okay. this idea that there are things underground, like Brian said, that these pig creatures are underground, but also, again, as I mentioned, that the land itself shifts and changes, and that it has the power to do that on its own. Okay, one of the quotes from that section: "One thought there is in closing that impresses itself upon me with ever-growing insistence. It is that I live in a very strange house, a very awful house, and I have begun to wonder whether I am doing wisely in staying here. Yet, if I left, where could I go, and still obtain the solitude and the sense of her presence that alone make my old life bearable?" And that, I think, with one final comment before we stop the part one, I think that that's an important aspect of horror in general. Okay, a lot of times people are like, well, if the house is haunted, why don't they just leave? I've heard that as a criticism of countless haunted house stories, and I've heard that as a criticism of a lot of small town horror stories, or to an extent a lot of cosmic horror stories. If you knew you were getting into something, why wouldn't you stop? And I think this is one of those elements that it's important to acknowledge, particularly in a house story. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes there's no place to go. Sometimes there's no money to go. There's no resources. Where would you go? Where's this old man going to go? Where's he going to take his dog and his sister? What if you're just too far gone? Okay, and that, I think, again, there's a subtlety, there's a subtle suggestion of it, but it's important in cosmic horror, this idea that you are trapped in a place that you know is bad, a place that is causing you to deteriorate, either mentally or physically. You are trapped there because the elements of life, of fate, of the world around you are so much larger and so much more indifferent that you are powerless. That's the aspect of cosmic horror. You are powerless in this situation because the elements conspiring against you are bigger and they don't care. Okay? Now that's where we're going to lead this, because the next part of the manuscript, the part of the story that starts with the fragments, okay? That starts with, I believe it's called Oceans of Slumber, all right? That's where we're going to pick up on with part 2, where we are going to look at a helpless smallness in the face of the immutable, and the invulnerable. The house and the mist that follows it, and endless galaxies, and the rapid passage of time, all of that's coming up. All of that indisputable cosmic horror we're going to tackle in part 2. Now, before we go, I'd like to say that this week's show is brought to you by The Strange Case at Mystery Ridge by David Bryan. It is a supernatural cosmic horror mystery inspired by the works of none other than William Hope Hodgson. Jack previously survived a tragedy that claimed many lives. He knows he is a lucky man. Life-changing injuries may have forced him into semi-retirement, but he now spends his days fulfilling what has always been his passion, investigating reports of paranormal and occult activity. These cases have led to his experiencing many supernatural incidents, though he also has his own cross to bear when it comes to the bizarre. Since the accident which almost killed him, Jack has developed a tendency to experience out-of-body events, and these unaccountable bouts of astral projection are now presenting questions of their own. During these astral travels, Jack finds himself being repeatedly drawn to another continent and an isolated North African town. When a young woman turns up at Jack's door claiming her English country cottage is infested with troublesome spirits, he begins to suspect the two incidents are connected. As he digs deeper, his investigation leads not only to the restless dead, but also the revelation of a pernicious evil and an even more dreadful truth. Humankind is but the pieces in a game, plastic soldiers waging war between boy gods. The paperback is available from various outlets. It sounds awesome. The ebook is exclusive on Amazon Kindle and can currently be read for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. And that's it for this week.
I've read it. It's fantastic.
Is it?
Yeah.
It sounds
Yeah.
great.
No, I've read it.
It
It's
sounds
fantastic.
really wonderful.
Yep.
I'd like to thank Brian Keene for guest hosting on
you.
this episode of Cosmic Shenanigans. If you enjoy Cosmic Shenanigans, you might also enjoy another show I co-host, The Horror Show with Brian Keene.
We curse more there.
We do curse more there, and there's a lot of giggling as well and a lot of funny. So it's definitely worth checking out. Both of them are available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and all other platforms via the Project Entertainment Network. Please consider supporting the Project Entertainment Network. You can do so by subscribing to their Patreon page, which is available, I believe, from a click on the Project Entertainment Network website.
Patreon.com/projectentnet.
Thank you. Please consider supporting them so that we can continue bringing you shows like The Horror Show with Brian Keene and Cosmic Shenanigans. I'd also like to thank engineer Dave Thomas. Please watch his channel most nights at twitch.tv/meteornotes. Thanks for listening, and we will see you for part 2 of The House on the Borderlands. Bye.
May I have your attention for the morning announcements? Please be advised the Lunch Ladies Book Club is coming to Project Entertainment Network. Join Shelley, Mimsy, and Ashley as they dish out a deep review of a book. Horror. Thrillers. Whatever they want to read and review. A blonde, a brunette, and a redhead walk into a bookstore and they're serving up hot book reviews. The Lunch Ladies Book Club? Coming soon, exclusively on Project Entertainment Network. Would you now stand for the national anthem?
Don't get your lunch money stolen!